Further debate? The member for Oshawa.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and I am glad to have the opportunity to stand and take some time, rather than just the questions and comments, and take some time to share voices from community members on this issue. We're debating, actually it's been a full 12 hours that we have been talking about keeping students in class, this piece of legislation, this Bill 28. I have already spoken about the need for this government to have that sober second thought and realize that the hammer that they are bringing to this situation is an overreach, that what they are doing with the notwithstanding clause, overriding sections of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and that what they're doing here, and actually says on, I don't know if it's page 1 or before page 1, it's the explanatory note, that says that this Act will apply despite the Human Rights Code. And for the folks at home, whether they are up on education issues or have parents in school or just folks, if they're tuning in, to have a piece of legislation that on page 1 says, despite the Human Rights Code and notwithstanding the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, we're going to go ahead and do this thing. And there's more in here about that it will not fall under or will limit the jurisdiction of the Ontario Labour Relations Board and tribunals and folks who would otherwise challenge them. That puts this piece of legislation pretty far above the law. I mean, I guess it is law, but it's changing the rules of the game. And I think everybody on the playground understands that that's not fair. Speaker, what I'm going to do, though, is kind of sum it up. This is a bill that violates workers' rights to collectively bargain, and I'm going to say that that's a right. The right to collectively bargain, the right to strike, they're not just inconvenient things, they're rights. And this government has been sort of talking about these issues as though they don't matter, right? That the government says, we're making a decision and we're going to do it anyway. And that is the problem, because these rights have been hard fought, they've been hard won. There's been blood spilled, to gain these labour achievements, and they are rights. And this government, NDP, Conservative divide, maybe, right? I haven't met too many Conservatives that are like, rah, rah, labour is great, and we believe that workers have collective power. They seem to say, yeah, in theory, but not when it comes to us and what we want. Those are pesky things we need to outmaneuver. But that's not how we do things in Canada. It's how, unfortunately, things are being done now, and it's a problem. It removes the incentive, of course, for employers to negotiate in good faith. Other folks are going to see this, and I think that's the point, right? You're making a heck of an example of education workers who are the lowest paid education workers, making like $39,000, some of them. The government doesn't like us to talk about part-time workers. There are a lot of part-time workers who are seeing themselves in this legislation and realizing that they don't matter to this government. Education funding has not kept pace with inflation or population growth. This is just one more opportunity for this government to undermine public education. And I wish that they would take a different course, because I will say something, and I hope you hear me. The working conditions for these educational assistants, for the custodial staff, for library workers, for all the folks, for the staff in schools, their working conditions are the learning conditions of students in Ontario. And when you are forcing people to work in unsafe work environments, when you are not listening to them when they say that they need, sick time, when they need cleaning supplies, whatever it is that they say that they need, smaller class sizes, that's something we've heard before, but they can't have it, right? Those are the learning conditions of these students that suddenly today we're hearing this government talk about that they care about. So let's hear from some of the parents who have been writing in, and I will acknowledge that there are education workers who are also parents. Okay, there's this neat Venn diagram that conveniently this government has been talking about parents as though they're folks over here who are standing up for education. Well, you have educators standing up for education. You have education workers who are parents, and this is an attack on them. But here's someone in the community, Taylor, who says, the Premier's use of the notwithstanding clause to impose collective bargaining terms on education workers is a gross overreach and the first time the clause has been used to attack labour rights in provincial history. If the Premier is allowed to get away with this, he will use this power to crush public sector unions across Ontario. Education workers have been underpaid for a decade, working in unsafe conditions and doing an essential and very difficult job. They deserve our solidarity. This legislation must go no further, says Taylor. That's just a community member. Another community member, Gemma, says there is simply no way the current government can spin back-to-work legislation as an appropriate way to avoid collective bargaining and strikes. The only ethical way to get education workers back to work is to sit at the bargaining table and hammer out a deal. If people want to reduce wealth inequality and strengthen our economy, the bare minimum we can do is treat our workers like human beings. What a novel concept. Thomas is a Whitby father, and I won't read some of the words that he's used a bunch of symbols, but I will read the other ones. Thomas, a Whitby father, says, quote, I just wanted to express my utter disgust at our government's underhanded and bad faith negotiations with CUPE and its failure to pay our public citizens a basic living blank wage. No consultations, no reasonable negotiations, abdication of responsibility during the pandemic, continued failure to fund our health care and education system. I'm completely exhausted and sick of it. And that's just Thomas. I'm sharing the folks from out in the community because I want the education workers in the province to understand we are all hearing from parents and neighbours who stand with them. So I have a pile of education workers that I will happily read. Wish I could set the clock back and have a bit more time. But it's important that they know that despite how they're being painted by this government, that people support them. Here's one from Sarah, who says, as a parent with a child who attends school in Ontario, I'm disgusted at the government's attempt. I don't think I can say that. Okay, but at the government's, I'm going to add some words here, to give parents money by offering us a $200 payout for education reimbursement versus seeing those funds allocated towards paying our education workers a livable wage. Obviously, if schools are forced to shut their doors without the support of these workers, then they are worth more than the 32-cent raise that the province is offering them. These people keep our schools running and are tasked every day with keeping our kids safe. Give them their raise. They deserve it. They're asking to earn enough to stay above the poverty line. Parents are not against CUPE getting their raises. We're against the Minister of Education and the Premier thinking they can buy our goodwill. That money could have settled this. Thank you, says Sarah. I will actually read from local CUPE 218 President Dennis Gibbs, because he sums it up, and I'm not going to have time to get all of the voices of the education workers on the record. He says this government has been talking about education workers as if they're not parents. They've been talking about them as if they're not constituents. They've been talking about them as if they're not concerned members, community members, who want what is best for their families. I know that's not the case because I actually listen to members of my community. I've heard from countless education workers, parents and constituents. They're paying attention and they're mad. They know that students need us to do better and that workers deserve more. This legislation tramples on worker rights and harms students. It won't solve the staffing crisis at our schools, so it won't help students get the supports they need. It won't end the poverty wages workers are living with, so it won't help them feed their families without relying on food banks. Speaker, in the last minute or so, I'm going to reminisce a tad. I had the esteemed privilege of being a teacher in a classroom. And I remember when I first started teaching and I had educational assistants who were able to assist educationally, who were able to help kids with their academics. It was actually really great to have another adult in the room, another caring adult who was able to sit and maybe do small group or work with a kid to do a couple of assessments while I was doing other things, and the classroom worked. It was great. And then things started to change in the schools. With the last government has started, it's continued, it's gotten worse in terms of behaviours and violence and mental health needs and challenges, and we are pulled in all directions, and educational assistants now are following kids who are runners, they're working with behaviours, they are not able to do that educational assisting. If we actually took some of the money that went flying out the doors to the parents for textbooks or tutoring or whatever the government said that was for, if that was invested in education, we could have had more educational assistance, could have had more supports and services. There are other ways. There is such thing as collective bargaining, which all of you are learning about, some of you for the first time as we're having these discussions. But collective bargaining is supposed to be happening right now. And 96% of the CUPE members voted in favour of a strike if necessary. And you took away that right? That is shocking and shameful. And, Speaker, that is my time. But please, invest in public education. Don't disassemble it.
Thank you. We'll go to question. I'll recognize the member for Scarborough-Rouge Park.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We can collectively agree that parents of this province, they recognize that their kids have fallen behind during COVID-19 pandemic, which is consistent with the global trends. And even students, they want to stay in class where they belong. Madam Speaker, as the legislatures, we have a moral obligation to stand up to keep kids in class, because school provides a positive social impact. It provides friendship and normalcy for kids. And, Madam Speaker, young people are profoundly impacted by school closure. My question to the official opposition is, why does the NDP insist upon choosing to negatively affect these students by supporting this strike? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
And actually, I'm going to answer that with a letter from Met. So Met has worked as an educational assistant for 22 years. She's noticed that the job has changed significantly. And why I'm choosing her letter to answer you is, as you're talking about disruption, Met says, we have a Premier and an Education Minister who do not care about the safety of our students in the public system. If they did, they would be willing to spend the $2.1 billion surplus that is sitting in the Education Fund on something that would actually benefit the education system, like more staff to ensure your children are getting the education they deserve. Also went on to say, so far this government has closed the schools for 27 weeks straight during the pandemic, longer than any other province. They have maxed out classrooms to the point there is barely room to walk, let alone clean, and they have reduced funding by $800 a student. End quote. So I'm answering your question with that because your record of investing in education has caused unbelievable disruption. Your refusal to reduce class sizes has caused irreparable harm and significant disruption. So maybe stop that. Thanks.
Thank you. Question. The member for Parkdale High Park.
Thank you, Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for her excellent presentation. And I think before I ask my question, I just want to note that, I mean, she's been a teacher in her former life before entering politics and has seen firsthand the impact of cuts to education and also the issues we have faced in around staffing in the education system. So, given that this bill not only tramples on the democratic rights of education workers, this is ultimately about suppressing wages. It is about wages of the lowest paid workers. It is about taking away what little benefits they have. These workers are the backbone of our education system. And so I'd like to know from the member, what effect will this have on the education system, particularly when it comes to staffing? Thank you.
Response, member for Oshawa.
I think I'm going to also answer that with the words of someone named Jennifer. Jennifer is a school secretary and a parent, and would like to thank anybody in this room who's standing up for education workers in opposing this bill. But Jennifer says, quote, I see the state of our education system daily as both a worker and a parent. I'm tired of watching it crumble. The $200 payments recently offered to parents were such a slap in the face to those of us who work in education and know what that money could do if it had stayed in the public education system. We can't expect a strong future for our children if everyone around them is overburdened and overwhelmed and schools continue to be chronically underfunded. She goes on to say, it breaks my heart to think about leaving a job I love, but I have to take care of my family and future. End quote. And that's from Jennifer. So in response to your question, I worry about the future of our classrooms, of our schools, when caring people will not go into this field because they know how they're going to be treated and how they will not be compensated, and so many are being forced to leave.
Thank you for the question. The Minister for College and Universities.
To the member from Oshawa. My question is, our government has put forward a deal that includes a 10% increase over 4 years, plus maintain the most generous set of benefits, sick leave and pension. My question is, what do you consider a fair deal?
Member for Oshawa.
So I'm going to start with, maybe let's talk about the fact that pensions and benefits are not some like gift bag from the government. Like you don't pay those. And the educational workers, the educational assistants, the education workers that we're talking about are not teachers. They don't have those benefits and pensions. They're some of the lowest paid in the province. Some of them are making $39,000, and you guys are like throwing other numbers at us, pretending that part-time workers aren't real people, like aren't working their teasers off in our schools. So why are you, well, as this person says, single mother Nicole has said, lastly, I feel strongly that I am worth more than the pieced together to look good percentage this government feels I am worth. The children I support and those I should be supporting are also worth more than this government feels they are worth. That's how the workers feel. That's their words.
Response.
Do a better job convincing them that you care.
Thank you. The member for Nickel Bell for the next question.
I wanted the member to share with us, she comes from the education system, she has been there, she has been a teacher. What happened when a group of worker, education assistant, early childhood educators, they have voted to push their unions to negotiate a new deal. They are not happy with the deal they have now. They want negotiations to continue so that they get a better deal than what the government has put forward. What do you figure will happen in the classroom if this piece of legislation goes through? Those people are legislated back to work, have a deal that they are not happy with. What does the human side of this look like in the classroom, you think?
Member for Oshawa.
Thank you. I feel badly for the education workers who are seeing themselves, represented as lazy or greedy, or I mean, the way that they're being portrayed and their union is shameful because they are their union. You can't separate the two, right? Like CUPE, the 55,000 members, they're their union. And so your question of what could it look like on the human side after this, I'm hearing from folks like James, who's a custodian. He said, I barely earn enough to support myself, let alone help my mom, who's 75, also still working as a part-time custodian because she can't afford to retire as it won't cover the cost of living because my school board doesn't pay me enough to pay for the rising cost of living. He's very concerned because he says, my coworkers and I earn on average $39,000, can't afford to live on that. We want our students to have the services they need in our public schools. I'm asking you to give us the improvement on wages and working conditions that I need. So if that doesn't happen, if James and everybody else doesn't get what they need to pay the bills and stay in this field, the fields that they love, they will be forced to go elsewhere. We're going to lose the caring adults that we have. Or they stay and they continue living in poverty, which should not be an acceptable outcome. Right now, this week, we're supposed to be watching this government bargain. We're supposed to be seeing bargaining happening. And you guys have said no. And that's too bad. And I feel badly for James and his colleagues.
Next question. The member for Don Valley North.
Thank you, Speaker. We are here to debating the bill 28 because CUPE asked a higher percent salary raise, even though they are among the most well compensated in the country in the same sector. Yet, CUPE consistently insisted there are unreasonable demand for the nearly 50% increase in compensation. This represents nearly $19 billion in tax dollars if extended across the sector, the entire education budget of every alternative province combined, the entire budget of the province of Saskatchewan, and almost twice the budget of the Ontario Ministry of College and University. The combined annual education budget of British Columbia, Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan. Speaker, my question is simple. To the question of opposite, is this reasonable and sustainable?
Thank you. Member for Oshawa to respond.
So interesting that the member asked me about, is this reasonable and sustainable? I don't know that I have come across a government member today that has talked about reasonable or sustainable and that we share that definition. Because when we are sharing the voices of committed education workers We are hearing things are not sustainable. These are workers who cannot do it anymore. They cannot continue, to work how many jobs? Like, I've got folks who are writing in saying, I love my job, I don't want to be forced out of it. Is it sustainable for single parents to have 2 jobs when they're working full-time? Is that sustainable? So you gave me like a laundry list of every dollar you've spent compared to everybody else. So I'm going to tell you that the money going into the classrooms is insufficient, that the money going into education is not sufficient. If you're setting money on fire by, with the $200 here and there, those
Thank
are your
you.
decisions.
We're out of time. We're out of time. Thank you. We'll go for further debates.